I wanted to kind of start at the end of your book, the sustainability class, where you're talking in the afterword about the origins of the book. It made sense to me to maybe begin there, given that you had skin in the game to begin with, right? You were both involved in organizing against the destruction of park extension in Montreal, on the basis of what you call a false green narrative. And I kind of wanted to ask about how the genesis for this book grew out of that struggle, and how you kind of realized through that struggle maybe the what you call the vagueness of sustainability, and how that might be like a kind of core problem, basically, like this kind of cloud of ideas and feelings that we call sustainability. Did either of you want to maybe speak to that sort of original moment for the book?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks Scott for having us. And yeah, that's a really good question. I think really the construction of this new campus that of the University of Montreal that was being constructed at the time in 2018, 2019, um, in the neighborhood was really was really disturbing on many levels, but not least of which was the way that they were branding it as like ecologically conscious or sustainable, and how that was the basis for which this campus was. It's the social science campus, it's the science campus for the university. Um, and they had made promises about social housing that they were going to construct, but it the key point was that this campus was being constructed on the edge of one of Canada's most, basically Canada's most unequal neighborhoods, in terms of well, the juxtaposition between two different neighborhoods. But one of them, Park Extension, is a first kind of a place where many immigrants live, where people first arrive when they come to Montreal, where a lot of temporary workers live, and it has already had quite a like was already kind of targeted by real estate speculation even before this campus was being constructed. So the fact that this campus came and was being constructed as, branded as sustainability wasn't even the sustainability part of it. It was more what the campus was doing. But when it was branded as sustainable, it became like, hey, there's something there's something very insidious going on with how, environmentalism is being like used to, as a kind of, I mean, yeah, as a project of evicting people who are seen, poor people essentially, who don't have other recourses, other places that they can go to. So it's really, really that became really obvious. And then we started to see how this process was had already shaped the city in Montreal, like how other neighborhoods were had already gentrified under the same sort of principle. So when at the time, I think, Aaron, you were like actively organizing around the campus, against the campus, and I had actually had written an article for Al Jazeera about like this kind of hipster environmentalism, where fair trade coffee shops and things are ways, all these forms of, yeah, virtue signaling become ways that actually do far more damage, environmental, ecological damage, than what they claim to be doing, in fact. And so then that struck like a chord. I think there was a lot of interest in 2019 around this, yeah, this sort of hipster environmentalism. And so that essentially led to the creation of this book. Aaron and I um, decided to work together on it. And yeah, I think maybe, yeah, if you want to add further things to that.
Yeah, well, I had been doing research on this idea of green gentrification that through green amenities j that are introduced to a neighborhood. In my case, it was like food type spaces, restaurants, cafes, but also like public markets. Community gardens or urban agriculture, and how that often led to pricing out um, long time and low income residents. And so like I started getting involved living in Park X, started getting involved in this initiative to basically track the evictions happening as a result of this campus moving in next door. Um, so we could really see the impact of like the direct correlation with this new development and the increase in real estate. And yeah, I think the connections just started really happening where it wasn't just this urban phenomenon of gentrification that is very a very specific conversation, but we started seeing it kind of everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That this lifestyle was being linked to, being claimed to be the solution, but is actually driving a lot of the extractive economy and the type of investment that is leading us off the brink.
Yeah, and I think, the book begins in this moment of kind of, self reflection to some extent, or at least like scrutinizing the green stir, and then really zooms out to try and provide a structural view of these trends happening at the kind of bigger level where, this green gloss gets deployed to kind of, reproduce the status quo effectively, right? And what I like too is that it feels like your own kind of avowal of cognitive dissonance and complicity with this sustainability class isn't just a gesture. Like it is about you actually trying to kind of own your own ensnarement in this system. Yeah, because like and I loved the way the book begins with this journey to California. That seemed like a really important choice because California is viewed as this, green haven in certain ways, but it's a place of such incredible contradictions. You talk about people there microdosing on something green, and really, which I loved, right? That kind of tongue in cheek use of microdosing, but just like this collapsing of supposedly ecological things into creativity and good vibes with no messy politics required, as you say. I saw a lot of parallels between what you're arguing and this book, Futures of the Sun by Imre Zeman, which is largely about the politics of the center. And he argues that, like, the ecological left should be interested in trying to kind of seize the center, or what we sometimes call common sense. But what you're kind of suggesting is that, like, that argument is a little bit lacking. Like, we still need to keep in mind that common sense ideology, is this way through which like Erewhon becomes possible, for example, right? As what you call this kind of purification ritual. Did you want to just sort of talk a bit about your own relationship of complicity to these purification rituals? Because, the people I work with in the climate space are often hesitant to go there, right? Hesitant to go to a place where it's like you're actually undermining a part of your identity, right? Yeah, I don't know. That's sort of what I was thinking about. It's just like if you're interested in solidarity, is there a way in which making fun of people for microdosing on things that are green can theoretically work against that, or is it actually at solidarities that is at stake in like critiquing that?
Yeah, I would just say that we didn't really want like as you know, like we were uh not super interested in like only making fun of people who are living this lifestyle because we
Right.
also like acknowledged and avowed our own kind of presence in that lifestyle. What we
Mm-hmm.
were trying to do is understand how that lifestyle functions and also what kind of enables it and really the core of that common sense ideology. And what are some issues with that? And I think, yeah, I haven't thought about it that much in terms of common sense, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very good point, and I'm interested to check out that book. But common sense is a very contested thing.
Always.
What is
Yeah.
common sense is something that we're constantly fighting for. That in
Mm-hmm.
common sense, we have this idea that oh, you can buy yourself to a green lifestyle, but also which we can immediately say. or that we argue in our book that's false, but also in common sense, you know, there's a lot of very valid and important ideas of you should leave a place better than you found it,
Hmm.
or you should be kind to the people around you.
Hmm.
And like we have a moral obligation to the earth, like those are all very important common sense ideas. And I think what we tried to do was untangle the those drives, those really important kind of ethical dilemmas that a lot of people find them in,
Hmm.
and and show how some of the things that we're set up to easily reach for aren't always so helpful. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think also, and there's an element of critique, but I think we tried to balance that, tried to find a balance between like critiquing this class and this lifestyle while also knowing that we are a part of it, and we have like, where we are, we have certain sensibilities. Some of these sensibilities are deeply normalized as well. They're normalized because of the language we use, because of decades of, just our whole lives and generations being embedded in certain ways of thinking about the world. And so that's not to blame, like that's not something that one should ever blame on someone else. So it's more like
Hmm.
let's untangle these components, and let's actually see where the power lies, and let's think a little bit, let's think beyond, let's just have this space where we can actually untangle some of these aspects without
Hmm.
necessarily knowing that, no finger can be blamed on our, on how the sustainability class necessarily, yeah, how it came about. But now it's our task having this information to like be able to weed apart, what are the false solutions and what are some other strategies that we can, yeah, that we can engage in that actually are more generative and more relational.
Hmm. And those are the reasons why I wanted to record this with both of you, because, the book is great. I want people to actually dwell with it. I want that people to actually sit with the ideas. And, I have this concern about the book, right? Lefty book world as itself, this kind of like weirdly siloed space, right? That, so part of the podcast is just like, let's put class on the table. Let's try and disentangle these things. And that's, one of the most heartening things about the book for me is the way it seems to be part of almost like this continuum of critical health studies research that is trying to understand the way that like Jonathan Metzl or like Ingrid Waldron or some of these people will try and understand how, the individualism at the base of a lot of health seeking behavior and even cultures of healthcare is counterproductive. It's against solidarity. It fundamentally is about positioning yourself as virtuous for seeking health. And I like how the book it seems to do something totally original, which is extend that to cultures of climate action, right? The kind of feel good cultures of climate action. So I think it's super teachable. I know a lot of people are teaching it that I've talked to. And I wonder, in spaces where you've had opportunities to have these discussions, do you do you find that you get to a generative place, or does it produce discord, right? Like for me, the insight that income is the best predictor of carbon footprint, which you spent a lot of time talking about, is a really foundational point. Is that something that kind of bubbles up in these conversations, that kind of class element of the struggle? And yeah, where do you find that sort of the generative conversations that the book is producing?
Yeah, people, I think it's been like when we did our book tour, it was really validating that a lot of people came to these book talks and were like, whoa, like this is actually kind of the conversation that I needed to be able to
Mm,
understand my own class position, and like to be able to pick that apart. Um, and it was really nice to hear how validating it was for a lot of people. But then there are some people who also have trouble with this. Like,
mm,
I'm kind of thinking we went to this one book talk in Baltimore where
Mm.
this old professor. got really hung up on the fact that like that he's been driving a electric car for 15 years and he barely, leaves his neighborhood. And he was very adamant of like, no, this is important. This is something that I'm doing that as long as you just move into a dense neighborhood and you buy an electric car, like you're doing environmentalism. Um, and I think actually what we're not saying is lifestyle choices don't matter. We're not saying that. Because then you what we're actually saying is it's kind of like what did we call it? Like tossing out that kind of guilt-ridden consciousness and where you start thinking about like you start getting into this brain of like, oh, which shampoo is the best one, and then you start like spend 6 hours researching like what's the best shampoo for me to use. It's like um and that's also very similar in the wellness world, where
Right.
you get this kind of like thinking where you're like overthinking every single action. And that's why we call it like that. That's the purity ideology. You're trying to like purify your life. Um, so it's not that your lifestyle doesn't matter. It's that um, actually we need to move beyond this kind of like guilt-ridden consciousness to a solidarity-based consciousness.
Right.
What one way of saying it is that I think a reason why the far right has gotten so much track as of late, as we all know, is that they're they're telling people, white middle class people, that it's okay. It's okay to be who you are, you know?
Right.
And it's
Embrace it. Like own it.
embrace
Yeah.
it, own who you are, own being a man. And and but I think there's something appealing to that because there's a lot of guilt that we carry around with us, and often that guilt can help us make important choices in life, but often it also freezes us up. And so here's a concrete example. Someone who read the book, she said, before this, I would spend hours trying to find like the most sustainable pants to buy online. Like is the cotton fully recycled or is it organic and like, oh, but what about the like elastic it uses? And she's like, now I spend that $200 like, and I just donate it to uh an organization that works on, let's say, Gaza solidarity or on like supporting farmers or like it the the calculus changed
Right.
for her after reading the book, where it kind of was maybe uh you know, lifted some weight off her shoulders and allowed her to identify where she can intervene and where it can be productive and how that can actually be quite fulfilling, to engage in solidarity with your neighbors, to attend a tenant meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna just to add something that just came to my mind. Like this, the problem with this guilt effect, this guilt-ridden effect, is it's very individualizing, and it end up and ultimately will never be satiated. It will always, as long as we have, we live in a you
Right.
know a white supremacist basis society, if we make certain assumptions of like 500 years of colonialism, there'll always be guilt. And so that guilt creates a whiplash effect at some point, which the right is like taking advantage of. It's like, why bother with that guilt? We'll just exonerate you of it. And so that's immediately appeasing. And so to just be constantly centering around guilt-ridden strategies is actually setting itself up for the right to take advantage of. So we as the left don't want to sit within approaches that are based on guilt creation, because that's ironically feeding right into the right, you know. So that's one thing I was going to say. The other thing was, one thing that was a generative conversation that came out of the discussions was that, you know, often we do talk about guilt, but we don't talk about shame. So, you know, that's for certain people to not purchase into the sustainability class trappings, and like to get into that world is a shameful thing. You know, it's part of what social mobility means. And that's why you see in a lot of places in the global south, you see the same kind of aesthetics emerging. You see the same kind of tendency to push people in that direction, because that is, quote, modern, or like that's the way that we need to have like green walls and exposed brick backgrounds and things like that. That's the stuff that we need. And like, so that shame complex is very much like it's the other side of the same coin as the guilt complex. And
Makes
these
sense.
are things that capital thrives off of. And so anyway,
Yeah.
to resume to like bring that together, it's really just that we need to move beyond these sorts of very individualizing approaches and see what is, you know, what is actually this ecological, the ecological devastation that's taking place has a deeper root, and that's where we should go.
I love it. And, you know, I also love the accessible way that you try and frame that, where the part of the point for you is to get wacky, sneaky, frisky, and risky, right? Like to try things that feel dangerous and that feel like you're leaving the safe harbor of the sustainability class. Just like move into that messier space. And I don't know, like to me, the concrete example from the book that comes to mind is the conversation around waste and waste diversion and waste disappearance, right? Where you sort of say, like, there are societies in which waste is part of almost like a circular economy model, and that seemingly for shame reasons, for like the ways in which human beings prefer to purify themselves, has been displaced that attitude toward waste. So I wondered if you could maybe tie what you were just saying around shame and its sort of silencing and visibilizing effects to that conversation around waste, because like when we talk about a circular economy, my goodness, it's itself is sanitized. It's such a sanitized, like UN friendly sort of like, you know,
Yeah.
like terminology. You're talking about something much muddier, almost literally. Could you expand on that at all?
Okay, don't get me you got me started on waste.
I
Like,
find it very interesting. You know, I'm in
yeah,
Halifax where we have this very robust solid waste program. It's like this
yeah,
jewel in the crown of municipal government here. And I'm just sort
yeah.
of saying, like, it's not a magical solution. And we ought to be weirder with our waste. It feels like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I my background was in like food system studies, and so I did I worked at and did research on food banks, which
Mm,
basically take industrial food waste and then try to, through volunteer work, distribute it to people who need it.
mm,
Um, and people know this about me, so they're always sending me articles of like, oh, here's this innovative way we've like reused food waste, or like, oh, isn't it the worst that like X% of our food gets wasted? And it's this very like, I think it's a very middle class
mm,
approach to waste, because if you look at a lot of global south societies, it's not so much about like, okay, we have all this waste that we're not using. It's that in every part of the system, there's something that uh, waste is being reused for. You
mm,
know, it's less of a hourglass system where, you know, you have this huge input, then you have the consumer, and then
mm,
um, or the supermarket, and it's more of a
mm,
uh, web, and um, so this idea of like purifying our ways of dealing with waste,
mm,
trying to do it smarter, more efficiently, um, and trying to innovate. oh, now we like reuse our, oh, sorry. Um,
That's what editing is for.
yeah. Um, where we, yeah, this idea of like, oh, we found an innovative way to reuse banana peels, or blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think it's a very strong obsession for a lot of middle class people. Um, and you could tell I have some strong feelings about it. But I think it's a very good example of that same kind of mindset where you try to purify and innovate and make it more efficient. But at the root of it is that we have this industrial system that is hourglass shaped,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that is bent on profit. So any kind of fix that you attach to that, it's still going to be the same system, which actually is incentivized to produce waste, but it produce
Exactly. Yeah.
to produce uh useless things that uh because in any ecosystem there is no waste. Actually,
Mm.
um a lot of plants, animals, they produce more than they need. Um and that's just how things are. Like it is good to produce more than you need
Mm-hmm.
in most natural systems. The problem is that when that more than you need can't be reabsorbed into that system. So the way we do it is we create a lot of toxic substances that we then have to put far away from us. When actually you want a porous system that is able to, be where things are able to be absorbed.
Yeah, I would love to read your book on that as well, right? Like that feels like the sequel here. But Vijay, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just I mean, just a small point is we make the mention of plastic pollution and just how much of the plastics that are have ever been produced are now they are still in use, but they're in the form of waste. So like most plastics that are around are in their waste form. They've already
Mm-hmm.
been used. And so waste is such an enormous contribution to the petrochemical economy. Exactly. It's like part of because it's such a huge it's such a central and huge component of the entire production process for things like plastic. So
Yeah.
it's yeah, I mean, I think that question around weight and like, yeah, and I think going back to the point of shame and guilt around it, I think this is just another kind of relationship or kind of yeah, just that a description of how this purification politics, whether through shame or through guilt, is trying desire to be ideal, this ideal type that one is seeking towards, is so ecologically destructive that there is no that to try to like
Mm.
achieve some sort of state of like removal of any kind of impurity actually is what is causing ecological harm, and there is no better illustration of that than waste than our waste economy.
I agree. And I think particularly plastic waste, right? Which feels like it's its own crisis that we can't even pay attention to, PFAS chemicals and so on. Like it's just like it's hard to even imagine. And yet, typically when it enters our news feeds, it's in the form of some technological, techno utopian solution, right? Whether it's a microbe that will eat the plastic or like some sawdust concoction that will absorb the PFAS or whatever.
Or a fish, there is apparently a
That's
mechanical
right.
fish that will gobble
Yeah.
up the plastic in the ocean. And I was wondering what will happen to that plastic when the fish has to expel
Yeah.
it somehow?
Yeah, it's like it's dizzying, right? It's just this swirling thing that doesn't actually get you to the bottom of the problem, which are the upstream choices and the kind of, capitalist system of overproduction to then out others or scold others for participating is obviously also not productive, right? It's the same thing when somebody chooses to buy their lunch in a plastic takeout container. Shaming them is obviously not the way to go. And I think that's why the book for me reads a bit like a manifesto, where, while others are advocating maybe a structural perspective, you're really advocating I mean, you put it in these terms like betrayal, sabotage, right? Getting frisky. And I think, it comes from this thing we've already talked about, which is a kind of hostility to virtue signaling, which, I think we're saying, or I've learned from your book, is in many ways opposed to solidarity. But you also say it's a kind of noise, right? This one-upsmanship is a kind of noise that largely distracts and detracts from system change. But I guess, like, for me, if we're saying that, and I agree that, like, this virtue signaling, this individualism, green stir subjectivity is, like, against solidarity, I guess it's like, it's helpful to me that the book ends with an attempt to define what solidarity is, and almost kind of, sometimes what it feels like, right? You say it's not, you define it in the negative, right? It's not charity, it's not representation, and it's not a career. I felt most implicated, I think, by the third, because my career is very much in, like, climate communications and trying to build that bridge, right, to your average person. But I guess my question would be, like, if the goal is some kind of more convivial solidarity, and you're defining it by what it's not, then it feels like that's symptomatic of seeing a lot of false forms of solidarity, right? And could you kind of talk about, especially maybe like representations of solidarity and how they can be distracting? Because I felt like there were examples that maybe weren't used in the book of those kinds of like false forms of performative solidarity, which are often temporary,
I mean, I can give a really good example. I was just at the global forum for social. It was a global forum for social and solidarity economy in France. It's a global network that has a meeting every year. I mean, it brings together thousands of people who work in the solidarity economy. So we're talking about cooperatives, like credit unions, like a lot of this third sector, I'd say. But really, really this is an excellent example of like solidarity that has made its way into professionalization, that has become, basically doing the work that the state has failed to do and chasing after the state, which is becoming increasingly, imposing austerity politics and moving more to the center and to the right, chasing after those same governments for the small crumbs to be able to continue their work, which is increasingly growing out of hand. And yet, solidarity is viewed as well, this is what another world looks like. It's literally framed in a way in this kind of like, let's pat each other on the back because we're doing the work that needs to be done. So it's that kind of solidarity, I'd say, is a very good example of like this professionalizing and sort of like, we see that. That's not to say that cooperatives are obviously, that's not to say that any of these initiatives that are taking place within the solidarity economy are not absolutely essential. They are. It's just that, when they become sort of the end in itself to the sort of systemic transformation that is needed, then that's very dangerous, actually.
Yeah, you say expect co-optation, right? And I think that's an important insight. Like, expect the co-optation of even and especially positive values like vibrancy and so on, right? Which I think is bang on. The sort of simulacrum of conviviality sometimes encounter.
Well, here's another example of what you're saying, like the solidarity in the negative is, social media. And I think since we wrote the book, both of us have like thought a lot more about how social media like really structures the way that we think about reacting to things. Representation, like, oh, if you post like something bad happened and you feel driven to make a statement as if you're like a corporation, like or
a brand,
as if you're a government, like now I must make a statement on this thing that has happened and I have to put out my own take on it. So I must represent myself. Also, career, like I have to create a career, like start, oh, maybe I can monetize this in some way. Okay, how do I like show solidarity with people and then show that this is a way that I can get views and actually get advertising revenue on,
Mm,
you start being pushed in these kind of like ways of thinking that are exactly embody that type of, anti solidarity. And we just get kind of pushed and canalized into ways of acting of like, oh, bottled up feelings, I'm gonna post. That's gonna let off some of the pressure, and inside, you didn't make it didn't make a difference, but at least you acted. At least you did something, and
mhm,
that's how it kind of replicates itself, and that's how content is created.
mhm.
So yeah, as we also say in the book, expect co-optation, and yeah, get offline.
If you do a scroll of an Instagram reel of feel, you'll see all these reels that when they are produced, it's like it's like some change was created in the process of doing. I mean, one can zoom out and see all the production a lot of cultural material, including books like
Mhm,
that we
mhm,
write. All these things are also they get commodified, right? And then they become acts of sort of resistance or action in among themselves. No, they're not. They're actually they are just, these it's information creation, but it's not the same thing as what solidarity really is. And it's not the same thing as actual kind of collective organizing and action that cannot take place online.
mhm.
It is on the streets, and it is with talking to people.
Yeah, I mean, especially this sort of diagnosis of the airsats solidarity that we see on social media reminds me of like, I just did an interview with Ty Nguyen on his new book, The Score, and he talks about how these metrics and systems of incentivization largely value capture us, right? So you have intrinsic values, but then the systems are these standardized systems for kind of winning and losing, algorithms that boost a post that is divisive means that you get kind of the rewards of division in your metrics, right? And it just, as you say, kind of channelizes you in certain ways. I think this is not unrelated to the battle over Cop City, which you say is, absolutely a grassroots, place based, community driven resistance movement, but one that I've encountered largely in this like highly mediated way, right? Where I'm reading Natasha Leonard articles on The Intercept, and I am seeing like Instagram reels about the murder of Tortuguita and so on, right? And I thought it was really powerful that the book, you decide to kind of, in a sense, end, I think, on Cop City as an example of a kind of, an exemplary case of the enclosure of public land for like these carceral purposes that isn't, opposed by the public at large. Cop City, though, you don't hear much about it anymore because it feels as though the system won and that largely the algorithm absorbed that resistance. But I think you see a complete opposite reality, presumably because you have communicated with actual like people on the ground and like folks that are, deeply embedded in that struggle. Could you just sort of maybe expand on why Cop City was featured the way it was? Bookending the book as an example of a kind of ecology of resistance.
Yeah, I think well, I think first of all, it really provides a super kind of like it's a really clear and evident case of like all these factors coming together, just really, really insidious, like
Mm-hmm.
of, you know, yeah, just the Muscogee Creek, like the return to the land, the carceral state, the carceral like history, the environmental, ecological impacts, the space that it had meant for people, the Hollywood, the dystopic Hollywood,
Yeah,
like all
which
the
I didn't
things.
know, by the way. I didn't realize there was a Hollywood studio also that had bought land, place on that land. That's
And
wild.
that the cops are getting trained by the
The
IDF and things
IDF.
like all
Yeah.
kinds of things that are happening in this particular space. But I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the reasons why we really focus on it also is because it demonstrates like the autonomous and decentralized nature of organizing.
Hmm.
That it's not like one particular way to do things. It's like many different ways can work. But like it also demonstrates that kind of being frisky and being creative with counterbranding and things like that. So the
Yeah,
way that, you know, the same tactics that are used by public figures, by companies are kind of like, yeah, just like twisted around and just like represented in the same
mm,
sort of light, just to make kind of to make fun, to poke fun, but also to clearly demonstrate the absurdity
yeah,
of of these tactics, you know. And so I think
for sure.
that it brought together a lot of different ways that people can organize that are like, they're not, of course, they are not, they do carry with them risks, but they are like, they're done out of joy in a way, like
Mm,
and they're done out of support for each other across sort of very different actions that might be taking place.
hmm, hmm. Yeah, I mean, like they created a movement, they created a community, they took up space. Like, I think eventually we're going to be able to access it vicariously through documentaries, which themselves are kind of fraught. There's a documentary, for example, doing the rounds here in Canada called Fairy Creek, that is, about the struggle against deforestation and so on. And it's this kind of like whitewashed narrative that largely seems to extol the sustainability class, right? So, the rhetoric of these documentaries is often something I think about. But what I think the book does, also, like beyond documenting Cop City, this terraforming of like Atlanta's expansive forest for these purposes, what it also does is talk about eco cities, these like, and extensively, right? You have like an enormous litany of examples of these like fantasies, basically these pipe dreams of petrostates that are largely about, clearing the conscience of the individuals who live there, and providing those like fashionable eco vibes, right? Could you speak to like, how those eco cities represent for you that terraforming impulse, and how, as you say, nature is not an established fact, right? It's a created vision, both in the context of Cop City and in the context of whether it's like Eco Village or Oroville or the Line Eco Park, all of these eco cities. Yeah, I'm super curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, we got really fascinated like by this kind of global movement where there's just a lot of, as you say, petrostates um, who decide to basically raise speculative investment into these massive tracts of land and brand them as ecological.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, you know, it's pretty interesting. Like the Line is, I think, the best example, and the one that maybe most people have heard about, is this
Mm-hmm.
massive city built in the desert that since there's been, reports estimating that it could have involved, I think, was it like 200,000 disappeared migrants involved in the construction, something like that. I don't want to just throw numbers out there, but um, it's not the only one. You have this new eco city. Uh, while we were writing the book, being built at high speed in Indonesia, that was supposed to be their new capital.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the name?
I can't remember, but it's in Kalimantan.
Okay.
Yeah, like it's
They're
one of the main.
proliferating, right?
They're,
These
they're
cities. Yeah.
proliferating, but since we wrote the book, the Line is kind of collapsing, like the
Yeah.
impact of that. In the Indonesian case, the new president has like cut the funding by 80%. Um, so what you kind of see out of these things is that they're kind of like, I kind of think of them as like the purest imaginary of the sustainability the sustainability class
Mm-hmm.
of what our techno future, green techno future could look like. It's kind of like they're like popping off these ideas of like transforming the earth through technology and innovation and investment, um, and and they're total failures. There's not one that has like really
Right.
uh, met any of their goals. But what the reason, if you then look deeper, okay, yeah, there's this imaginary that they really embody the vision of sustainability. But the reason why they exist is because our global economy is largely driven by real estate investment. It's the safest place to park your investment. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have mega uh, investment funds that basically hop around the world in a game of musical chairs to try to park their money and then move on, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the core of the issue. And also what drives the economy of the sustainability class. You know, when you have a new condo development that's touted as green in your neighborhood, it's the same issue. It's that it's a very it's the best place to park your money is in real estate investment. And so if you then shellac it in a green tint, um,
Mm-hmm.
it, you're able to kind of draw on those wishes of the sustainability class.
And maybe get some
Yeah.
additional funding and support from like
Sure.
the private
From
sector.
Yeah, it I guess maybe wish fulfillment, to put it in like a Freudian
Mm.
term. You're trying to fulfill a dream, and your ideology, but it never works, you know.
And I mean, it does also feel like I agree that, like, this system, which is about speculative capital and real estate. You say real estate accounts for something like 60% of global GDP, and 300%. What is it like? The debt accounts for more than 300% of GDP. So it's just like this. It's just this illusory system, right, of money swirling around, and it obviously is not going to be the thing that like builds the arc, so to speak. And I was really interested in how it feels like these eco cities are also about advertising the fantasy of climate resilience, of a kind of garrison galvanized urban space where you don't even have to worry about wildfire, flooding, whatever. You will be protected from that. And it does feel like the book, I think, has like kind of righteous anger about development being branded as climate resilient and sustainable, right? Because there are, as you say, thousands of people who are going to be disappeared producing these cities, and then millions more who will be locked out of them. So I think like that refusal is interesting, and I just wanted to kind of hear your perspectives on the great adaptation and this feeling that it really is a kind of fatalistic acceptance of overshoot and all of its consequences. Like, how crucial is that wish fulfillment around these eco cities to kind of perpetuating this acquiescence to apocalypse, actually? Does investing in the fantasy of climate resilience obscure all of these other realities, right? The reality of uneven climate impacts, basically, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think I mean, we can think of some of these cities not only it's kind of it's taking a mockery, it's a mockery of
Mm,
ecological relations. It's actually it's not it's like more than just poking, it's more than just greenwash, you know. It's
mm,
actually it's what I've been thinking about recently as insidious environmentalism. It's like a
right.
form of ecological relationship that mocks ecological thinking at all by using
Mm,
that language. So it does something further than just protecting itself
right.
through a a public relations exercise. It's not just public relations, it's actually a form of mockery. And so, and in the kind of world that we live in, like the ruling classes, they're looking for places to land capital in real estate, of course, but also in protecting themselves, like creating a world for them to thrive. And so cities like the Line, a lot of these other types of pie in the sky cities that we see, those green cities, eco cities are new ways for them, like they're kind of like bunkers. If should they ever
100%.
be
Yeah.
successful, but it's unlikely that they will be. But
Mm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
just to say, I I want to talk about Bill Gates because he just came
Yes.
up with this 10-page document where he says, "Oh, we've tried the climate change thing. I've put so much of my money into trying to fight the climate change issue, um, and it hasn't been very successful. And now I'm going to focus on malaria again." Basically, that's kind of the summary, and it made a big splash, but it to me, first of all, it's a recognition that all the money that they've invested in these things like carbon offsetting, carbon capture technology, which is what he's talking about, all these
Mm-hmm.
innovative technology, that's what he focused on, was innovating all these technologies, funding startups who are developing these technologies,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to draw carbon out of the atmosphere so that we can keep going. And he's basically recognizing, oh yeah, sorry, that was a waste of billions. Sorry.
Mm.
Um, and I'm gonna like focus on the thing I know that actually did make a difference, which is, putting my money in cheap malaria drugs or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to me, it actually it speaks to the core of the issue, which is okay, where are we right now in politics? We have 5 years ago, we had a massively strong climate movement, and all of a sudden, all of that is off the table. You have Mark Carney planning how to develop pipelines. He wrote a book about how you can harness the financial system to stop climate change, and he's basically negotiating to expand the pipelines,
Mm-hmm.
and has rescinded the main uh the flagship tool of economists, the carbon tax, has kind of scaled it back. And this
Mm-hmm.
was considered the main solution for climate change. And now they're funding, now they're deciding to fund carbon capture. But at the same time, we all know that shit doesn't work.
Yeah.
We know that doesn't work. But what you see happening is that everyone knows it doesn't work. They're still investing in it, and it basically kind of puts the lie,
Mm-hmm.
shows that it's all a lie, and then you have people responding, and reaching for the far right solutions, which is to basically further militarize society, and to block people from coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to basically pump as many natural resources as we can, because this is what happened. That's the result of fake green solutions, is that people realize that they've been duped, and they feel very angry about it.
Yeah.
um and now you have Bill Gates, who pumped so much money into it. He's saying, oh, that didn't work, let's move on to something else that's more efficient. um
Mm-hmm.
it really just shows how much of a lie it was from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I think just to in relation to that, false solutions that are proposed often by progressive liberal governments, those false solutions are in a way, they're prefiguring a far right response. So the liberals who engage in false solutions are in fact they're in bed with right-wing parties because they are creating the fodder for this backlash to happen. It's similar to what we were just talking about earlier with guilt and things like that. Like this
Mm-hmm.
response when somebody just says, "Oh, you don't need to feel that guilt anymore. We're going to exonerate you from that." That's a deep relief after you've been made to feel that guilt for the last X years prior, or whatever. So it's like a whiplash effect. It creates a whiplash effect when there are false solutions that are designed on purpose. When they're removed, it's all of a sudden like, well, that makes sense. And we are seeing those patterns all the time. We like the
Yeah.
Trump like removing, all the international development aid financing being just removed. It's like, well, those systems were already based on systems of oppression and exploitation to
Yeah.
begin with. But removing them under the context that we're in is going to cause a lot of harm. But that doesn't mean that, that they were not problematic to begin with, but like that's exactly what the right wing is doing. It's like, and so false solutions act as a kind of fodder for that. We have to kind of, yeah, just be, that's really important to see the link, I guess, between like these sort of liberal solutions and their illiberal responses.
Absolutely. It reminds me of, Holly Jean Buck's warnings in Ending Fossil Fuels about the appeal of decarbonized oil. If, from her very pragmatic perspective, that appeal will be especially dangerous if there isn't a renewable energy infrastructure that can actually provide power for people, right? People are going to. Her perspective is that your average person does not care necessarily where your energy comes from, and so Carney's pitch, right, our new prime minister's pitch for low carbon oil, for vibrant, vital Canadian oil that's free of any human rights abuses and so on, like that myth, that kind of Ezra Levant myth of ethical oil is being trumpeted by this supposedly progressive liberal government, right? So I think you're absolutely right that leads to mass disillusionment. What you say in the book, which I think is relevant here, is that green modernists are the motor of the sustainability class. My first question is, like, what role do you think AI is having in the current like evolution of the green modernist imaginary? And can you even conceive of a government that could advocate for what we need, which is powering down, right? Going even beyond decoupling growth and energy, but like actually advocating for powering down as a post work, as a form of efficiency.
Yeah, I would just say one thing, and I feel like Vijay, you might have a lot to say about AI specifically. But in the we very intentionally wrote the book not talking about like these kind of big picture policy questions. Like we didn't give a slate of policy solutions, like,
Right.
oh, this is actually what an ecological policy would look like, because that's not, there's many great books that
Sure.
do that.
Yeah.
What we wanted to do was kind of give something for individuals to get a sense of what it looks like to break out of that class conundrum, and to engage in environmentalism in a way that is based on solidarity, and to understand why that sustainable individualism doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing is, but we do have many thoughts about like these
Mm-hmm.
kind of big picture policy questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I do. I really do. I can imagine a government that would do this differently. And I think like something that we've kind of been hammering on about since the book came out, because we've had journalists ask us, why is climate change not on the new agenda in
Mm-hmm.
Canada? Like, why wasn't it talked about in the election? Well, the moment that you make environmentalism look like a housing issue or like a affordability issue, then you're going to be seeing a new kind of environmentalism. Like why, when we talk about Canada needs 15% more housing, why aren't we talking about that as an environmental solution? All these houses need roads, they need infrastructure, they need material that's going to be mined, and they're going to be on unceded indigenous land. So, like, this is actually a great opportunity for thinking about environmental solution. And same with cost of living. We have a economic system that's based on exports. It's just structured around cash crops for export. And if we change that system where we actually increase the ability for Canadian like farmers, producers to directly market to Canadians, people are going to love that. And if you make it affordable, if you create like public options for food access, people are going to love that. And maybe you can think of who I'm thinking about, but Zoran Mamdani won his mayoralship, is now the New York mayor, the incoming New York mayor, on exactly these kind of policies: free public transit, housing, childcare, universal childcare, and public access to food. Those are environmental policies, and that's maybe what we tried to argue in the very small section on the book that talks about policy, is this idea of public abundance.
Sure.
These are things that people need, and we can have governments that provide that. Yeah.
Yeah, I might just add, I mean, because I think that really captures, the sort of environmentalism that we're advocating for. It doesn't look like, green walls and green, bells and whistles. It looks like it looks like housing, affordable housing. It looks like public transport. It looks like, public services. That's what it means. And but yet in the budget, what we see is more, actually kind of it's speculative bubbles. It's like investing money into speculative hype, essentially, which is absolutely the opposite of, essentially what AI is doing is we're just putting money into burning up as much energy as we can, as fast as we can. Water and energy use as fast as we can. That's it. Because the turnover of that material throughput creates quote exchange value, and but it has actually no meaning to people. Most of it, the vast majority of it, has very little meaning to people and doesn't even provide any meaningful work for anyone. It is completely wasteful. And so we're just at that stage where it's like, let's just figure out some new creative way to burn as much energy as possible. Well, hey, let's that's what this is for. And also, of course, that it is based upon a philosophy, so we can go into that, but the confusion of sustainability with long-termism, and that's a whole thing that I could dive into. But and so when I think about what Bill Gates says, climate change is not going to affect humanity. Yeah, because humanity is defined in a very particular way for him and for people of his class, and so that's the long-termist versus the sustainability sort of division there. But yeah, that's just, I think that like what we see in that budget, what we see with a lot of these speculative investments are just really just completely, and they're completely in the opposite direction that we're going, and yet they are also in response to this shift to like the sort of Napoleonic capital world that we live, where Trump in particular is sort of forcing all these countries, to get in line, when in fact from this power, as you were saying, powering down approach, what it could look like in an alternative framing is societies like building solidarity against that, and like the people in these places building solidarity, putting pressure on their governments to defy that, to say no to that kind of thing. And that's clearly, and that's actually what is probably the case. Most people do not support what's going on, but yet their governments do not represent them, and so that's why we see this fundamental divide, I guess, between what we see in the budget and what people would actually need for their lives.
Yeah, I think there's a widening gulf between the two things, and I am heartened absolutely by Mamdani's victory, which Naomi Klein said isn't just anti-fascism, it's the antithesis of fascism. Right, an embracing of difference and trying to understand people, how to produce for need, right, rather than merely for want. I think, this is an extraordinary book that you put together, and it's really worth spending time with. And I'm glad I got to talk to you about it. Look forward to seeing, what you both produce in the future.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. That was great.